Okay, blood vessels. They're the tubes that carry the blood away from the heart to the tissues and back to the heart. And you have arteries and you have veins. And the arteries start off very large. Then you get more to the medium size and then to the smaller ones and then to your arterioles. Then you're in the capillary bed. And then they go from small venules to veins and then veins back to the heart. Pretty simple. When you look at a blood vessel, it is a hollow tube, but it actually is composed of layers, and these are known as tunics. And you have an internal or an interna, a tunica interna. You have a middle one, a tunica media, and then you have an outer one, a tunica adventitia, because it's adventitious tissue, or you can also say tunica external. The intima or the interna is actually a single simple squamous layer of cells, and that is the endothelium. Then that's anchored onto a basement membrane, and then there is an elastic layer and such. And then you come to the middle layer, the tunica media, and that is smooth muscle, elastic fibers and smooth muscles. Closer to the heart, more elastic fibers. Then you get to the medium, more smooth muscle. The outer tunic is just really elastic tissue and collagen fibers that helps give strength, if you will, to these vessels. So when you look at the tunica media, it needs to be elastic, but it also needs to be able to contract. Those are two essential things when you are thinking of these arteries. The elasticity, when that heart contracts, that fluids don't compress, so it goes out, it's ejected out, and the blood vessel then expands and all. Once the ventricle relax, then these arteries snap back, and then that helps keep the blood moving. The contractility is vasoconstriction, and that is how the vessels narrow their lumen, which then is how the body regulates blood pressure through the body and such. So a couple of things right there. Your larger arteries are more elastic, not much smooth muscle there. That includes your aorta, the subclavians. You have a right and left subclavians. The pulmonary artery. You have a right and left pulmonary artery. You have pulmonary trunk as well. That was on the heart. A brachiocephalic, you have a right. You just have the brachiocephalic artery on the right side. So you don't say right or left, you say brachiocephalic. Vertebrals branch off and feed the vertebrae. The common carotid, you have a right common carotid, you have a left common carotid. The iliacs, they branch off of the aorta. You have a right common iliac and a left common iliac. Then you get to the more medium-sized ones and such, and the amount of elasticity to muscular is different and such. So they're still thick-walled, but more smooth muscle, so they have more movement, more vasoconstriction. So these are your right and left axillaries, the mesenteric, the right and left brachials, the right and left femorals, right and left radial, the right and left popliteal, the intercostals, the tibial, right and left tibial. You have an anterior tibial and a posterior tibial on both sides. And then, of course, the splenic artery. The splenic branches off the celiac and such. From the arteries, you get to the smaller vessels. Those are the arterioles. They deliver the blood to the capillary beds and such. They have very little elasticity to them, and it's mostly just smooth muscle. So these, they get smaller and smaller. It's that taper that it talks about right there, until you get to the capillaries themselves. This is where a lot of your vasoconstriction and your blood pressure change takes place within these arterioles and such. So you change the arterioles size of the lumen, and you get a big change in your body's blood pressure, either goes up or goes down. Now we're at the capillaries. The capillaries are microscopic, very small right there, of course. They are near almost every cell in the body. but you tend to have more capillaries where you have tissues that requires a lot of oxygen for metabolic activities and such. There are some tissues that lack capillaries. So when you think about your membrane coverings, you think about the internal viscera, linings right there, the peritoneum and such, your cornea, clear, the lens of your eyes, clear, cartilage. You'll hear me and others refer to this as being avascular. So you put the letter A in front of vascular, and A means without, no vascularity. The capillaries is where the nutrients are exchanged. Not just the oxygen and the glucose and things going to the cells, but the waste materials, the CO2 and other things, the toxic material being brought back out. So the blood constantly moves. It's always flowing through this such. So the exchange and such occurs in this capillary bed, if you will. So a capillary is just a lot of extensive branching that increases the surface area. It slows the blood down. It allows for diffusion to occur because the movement of this material has to be very quick. And really, diffusion doesn't do the job. So there has to be other ways of getting the nutrients across these walls, if you will. They're not really walls. They're out of the capillaries into the interstitial or interstitial space. Now, you don't always have to have blood flowing through a capillary. So sometimes you don't want all the blood flowing through that. So there's a loop around, if you will. And that's these meta-arterioles. And they will actually bypass the capillary bed. So that's kind of like a thoroughfare channel right there. You see that. So they just kind of go around the capillary and then they duct back into the venous side of it. So when they are open, not much blood. Some blood flows through there, but not much blood flows to the capillaries and such. And when that tissue becomes metabolically active, then the meta-arteriole will constrict. And in the capillary bed, there's a muscle called a precapillary sphincter. It will relax, and then the blood will flow through the capillary bed. So these precapillary sphincters, when they are closed, the meta-arteriole is open. When the meta-arteriole is closed, the precapillary sphincters are open. It's just a round muscle on that arteriole before the capillaries. So when you think about capillaries, there's different types of capillaries. Like most of us probably think about is a continuous. It just flows straight through one side to the other. Your skeletal muscles and smooth muscles have those type of capillaries and such. Your connective tissues have that type of capillary. The lungs have that type of capillary. A fenestrated capillary is one with holes. Think of a colander where you would drain the spaghetti and such. Those are the holes, the fenestrations and such. Your kidneys have a capillary bed like that. Your small intestines have that. If you'll remember, the choroid plexus are lining the ventricles of the brain. They have that. Your ciliary processes of the eye. Remember, that's kind of where the lenses and such, the suspensory ligaments and all that in that portion of the eye, you remember those ciliary processes. That's where the fluid, the aqueous, the vitreous humor, the aqueous humor, that's all comes from the blood. It's bodily fluids and such, and it's through those ciliary processes. Endocrine glands, same thing. A sinusoid is more of a kind of an open area, if you will. It's not really a little tube running through there. It's more like just an open space, and also very large holes in there. There is some basement membrane, not always. And within these sinusoids, you'll have white blood cells, phagocytic cells and all. So areas that contain sinusoids would be like your bone marrow, right in there, your liver, your spleen, your anterior pituitary has these sinusoids and such, and then your parathyroids. They have that same type of blood flow, these sinusoids through them. You leave the capillaries, you're into the venules. The venules and such are when the capillaries unite. Now, right where the capillaries merge together and such, that outer layer, the adventitia, is missing. And it's right in that area that white blood cells can slip out of the bloodstream and into the interstitial space. When a white blood cell does that, when it wiggles through there, that is known as diapedesis. Diapedesis. So, but as you start leaving the capillary and moving back towards the heart and such, there is the inner layer, the intima and such. That is that endothelium. Then you have the muscular layer. It's not as muscular as arteries are, but it's still there. A little bit of ability to constrict and to dilate. And then this outer adventitious layer, pretty thick, helps because these veins are more on the surface of the muscles under the skin running back. And so they have to have somewhat protection, from abrasion, if you think of it like that. Some areas you have vascular sinuses. There's really no tunica media or no tunica externa and such. So when we look at the venous sinuses in the brain, when we think about the coronary sinus and the heart, that's two areas like that. Artery to veins, the blood pressure is much, much lower in the veins, but it's still under pressure and it's flowing from that towards the right atrium. It's having to work against gravity. And so along the way, you'll have veins, or you'll have valves, these little cusps. So it causes the venous system to be a one-way flow. So your skeletal muscles, when you move, walk, do things, when you breathe, all of this helps to move the blood from the venous side back to the heart. As you age, the valves can leak, they can break, and then that causes the blood to drop down to the next valve. That vein then kind of stretches out a little bit, and you get your varicose veins from that. Now, when you're sending blood through an artery to an area of the body, you just don't have one way in, one way out. You have more than one way to get there. And that is known as an anastomosis. It's just an alternate route and such. So if it doesn't have that, then an artery is just, that's it. If you block that artery, that's the end of it. It's the end artery. But most arteries, when they branch into a tissue, they have multiple pathways and such. So that's an anastomosis. Where is the blood in the body? About 60% of your blood is found in your veins and venules. About 5% within your systemic capillaries. You can see there 15% within the systemic arteries and arterioles, 8% in the heart, and then the rest there in your pulmonary vessels. So that's where your blood's located.